Nasibalekile mic yakho. I think it's a taping now. Something like that tape. Yeah. And sifake kahle tape. Ngakhuluma kakhulu.
Eita, also
Spanish. Oh, ngoba istickile but trust manje satisfied kwathi kokhuluma yena A1 kokhuluma yena A1 sizokhuluma like yeah.
Ngicabanga ngisuse lapho.
Yes.
Good evening, colleagues, students, friends of WITS. Welcome to this event, book launch, particularly the book Rebels and Rage, written by Prof. Habib. We thought it important to have this event on campus, as this is a conversation really about WITS, about the journey we've walked, about some of the challenges we face, and about what is still ahead of us. And particularly important because WITS is known as quite a robust space, as a space of engagement, of debate, often of the very uncomfortable issues that face our society. And it is for that reason that we are here today. And right up front, I want to, both the two individuals sitting in front does not need to be introduced, but to thank both Prof for being here, for having this engagement, and more importantly, Rennie Klabi, who will be in conversation with Prof and then facilitate the engagement with us this evening. So please feel free to ask the questions, to engage, to conversate, and to think through what some of the issues are that are being raised. Welcome, and over to Rennie.
Thank you so very much, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's give it another minute. Okay. Thank you very much. Adam, you wrote a very important book, and I'm a big and firm believer in documenting our histories, our journeys, but there are always contradictions, because in writing about ourselves and our lives, we write about others who are not always happy about what we write about. And that's exactly where we're going to start. I see there are some students here, but fewer than I thought. And I think a lot of students, we'll talk about their academics in just a moment, are pissed off with the book, because you don't come across as somebody who likes the fees must fall students. Their tone, their way of engaging with you, and there's a part in the book where you almost imply that they don't know what they're talking about, especially when it comes to decolonization. They know the rhetoric and the emotions of it, but they don't have the strategy and the ideas. You say they are bereft of ideas. What is that about?
So, firstly, let me kick off by saying, really, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate this. And I do want to underscore what Jerome said, the importance of us having an open conversation and a difficult conversation. And really, one of the reasons why we insisted on this is a couple of weeks ago, somebody had tweeted and said, isn't it an irony that Adam's going to have this book launch, or one of the book launches, at Stellenbosch University? But he's not having it at WITS. And I said, we are having it at WITS. It's just that we need to get beyond the examinations and the holidays that we will have. So I'm very grateful that this is happening. Let me start off with answering your question. You're absolutely right. This book isn't appreciated by all. It is a memoir. On the first page, I make very clear that I am not writing the definitive, neutral piece on fees must fall. I can't do that. I'm an actor in this process. I am an actor who was involved and immersed in making a whole host of decisions. And so in a sense, what needs to happen is I'm going to do a memoir and tell the story as I see it, and I'm going to tell it as frankly as I see it. And that's important to put up front. That I hope that in years to come, there will be historians and political scientists, etc., who will take all of these accounts, these personal accounts, and then come to arrive at the position that they are and make the analysis that is required. Mine is not the definitive analysis, it is how I see it. I think it's important for two reasons. One is it gives an angle on fees must fall that is different and that's not common. There isn't many vice-chancellors, whether here or around the world, who tend to write about struggle and the struggles they've confronted. I was struck that in the 60s and 70s when the US had their student struggles, there was very few vice-chancellors who wrote a book. There was one who was the wife of a vice-chancellor who wrote a book. But there was no one that wrote that story, and it was important to tell that story. To tell the story about trade-offs, to tell the story about the arguments with the ministry, to tell the story about the arguments with the president. Those were hidden engagements, and they needed to be put forward. Now, on the issue of the question you asked, which is, do I believe that students, I believe everybody approached fees must fall with some strengths and some weaknesses. I'm quite clear that I thought fees must fall was a progressive struggle. I think it is, as a demand, absolutely a legitimate demand. Where I differed with the fallers, if you like, was around the tactics, around the strategies, and how that played out. I do believe, by the way, and I had an engagement about 10 days ago in the University of Pretoria, that the decolonization debate is very rhetorical, it's not substantive, and that I do think we could have a decolonization debate that is far more focused on the kinds of reforms that happen. Too much of the debate, both at the level of students, at the level of vice-chancellors, and I must tell you, at the level of academics, is at the level of the abstract, that they don't get to the particulars, precisely because it's safe to be at the conceptual rather than the practical.
But is that a fair criticism when it comes to the students? I just want to talk about the students for the moment. Is that a fair criticism when it comes to the students? Because when I reflect on some of the things I believed when I was a student at Rand Afrikaans University, some I find, I still believe them, but I've fine-tuned them. I've tested some of my views against available text, against what other people bring to the table. Did you not miss an opportunity to work with the student and appreciate the fact that they are thinking about these things, and where else can they get cooked, as it were, if not at a university? What were your expectations? What did you want them to bring to the table?
So here's the thing. So let me give you an example. So firstly, if you look at the book, I reflect on and say very clearly that I thought some students were grappling with the question. So I used the example of Brian Kamanzi, who was an engineering student at the University of Cape Town. And what he does is explain about how you could change the curriculum. And he gives a series of very, very practical examples. So he speaks about the importance, not only if you're a civil engineer, of looking at how the technicality of bridges, but the social ethics of why bridges get built in certain places and not others. He speaks about the projects that are given. Instead of giving projects on how you rethink the building of urban spaces, why not think about how you reorganize squatter camps? So there's a series of very practical examples. There are other people that I'm quite critical of, because I think, and I do see this at the level of mainly the political activists. The political activists have retreated to the rhetorical. So let me give you an example. 10 days ago, I was at a decolonization curriculum at the University of Pretoria, funded by the Mellon Foundation. The two arguments that were made, both by academics, vice chancellors, and students and academics, was that context is important. If you want to decolonize, you need to locate a curriculum in context. And I think that that's largely right. They also spoke about the importance of multiple forms of knowledge, that society has multiple forms of knowledge and information, and some are recognized by the academy and some are not, and we need to provide access to these multiple forms of knowledge. And I said, that's broadly agreeable. Now, what my critique was both of those issues I don't disagree with, but you're deliberately speaking about context because it's the safest part to be. Now let's translate context to what it means in particular around naming traditions in a university campus. What does context mean? Should we start thinking about naming and replacing names after white persons with those after black persons? That's the one. Or should we start thinking about more indigenous traditions? Indigenous traditions, by the way, don't name after individuals, they name after evocative description. Go to tribal areas anywhere in this country, a manifestation. What mix of this must happen and how do you do it? If you name for individuals, what kind of names? Should it be politicians? Should it be academics? That debate is not happening in its specificity. We retreat to the context because it's the safest space to be, because once you get to the specifics, then the differences of opinion happen. On the second part, the context of, for instance, multiple forms of knowledge. I agree, we need to provide access to the university for multiple forms of knowledge. But are we saying that that knowledge must not be adjudicated? Because the real danger is the university simply going to become the madrasa or the Sunday school or the this thing? Or is it, must that knowledge be subjected to scientific analysis, reflection, methodologies, and out of that, the Chinese have done this beautifully with, for instance, medicine. What they've done is taken a whole series of therapies that are drawn from the community, subjected them to science, and then actually commercialized them and put out a whole new series of therapies that wouldn't have been available to the world. It came and sourced from the community, but it was subjected to the science and the critical scrutiny that a university is. Too much of the debate on decolonization is not subjected to that critical scrutiny. And for me, what we land up doing is then having the debate of decolonization at the level of the abstract. One final thing on this, which is useful. Much of the debate, when people tell me, and I engage students in this, would say to me, well, what we need is more scholars, black scholars reflected in our curriculum. That's something we've done 5, 7, 8, 10 years ago. They want African philosophers and African philosophical traditions brought into play. That we've begun to do multiple times, not by me, but by the academics that have been looking at that. It's the real complexity that now comes, is how do you deal with the issue of economics? A number of student leaders came to me and said, we don't want to learn what is neoclassical economics. We want to learn Marxist economics. But you can't learn Marxist economics without neoclassical economics. More importantly, don't confuse the university with the political school. Because there is, if you like, something happening here. Too much of people are saying, I want to learn what I'm comfortable with. But the universities are meant to make you uncomfortable.
Well, we thought they were doing that to you.
Well, yes, but I mean the university curriculum is meant to push you into the uncomfortable world. So for me, was I harsh? Yes, I was. But it's no use writing a memoir. It's no use writing a book and you're not going to be honest about it. And so that's the one thing I did say. If I'm going to write this book, there's too many public leaders who say one thing in the public and they do a completely separate thing in private. I think that's wrong. If you're going to call it, call it.
Did that happen at the academic level, the government level? Because you do write about the students themselves, that one-on-one student leaders, one-on-one, they were quite different to when they were in a crowd, and you don't need to spend too much time guessing why that is. So how much did the, moving the goalpost by leadership contaminate the space behind the scenes?
It happened across the board. I know, for instance, engagements with senior higher education leaders, including some vice chancellors, who would say, we entirely agree with you, but would never say publicly, they would say privately.
Why is that? Why?
Because I think people are scared.
Of what?
And one of my grumbles about, at this decolonization curriculum lab 2 weeks ago, I tweeted about this publicly. I said the thing that frightened me most was that what we had was senior higher education leaders. And they deliberately stayed at the abstract. And I can tell you they were not going to the specific because they were scared that they would be subjected to harassment, critique, by labeling, rhetorical engagement. And so it's safer to stay at the level of the conceptual, so that at the level of the conceptual you define what is progressive, but you don't have to get to the practical reforms that have this engagement. I'll give you another example. In the book I speak about, I had an interesting engagement in 2016. In 2016, just before, while we were engaging the student leadership, I want to be clear, I think the students are much more heterogeneous category than we imagined. But when we were engaging in the negotiations around getting a settlement, we had a serious engagement with people who were facilitating it. Previous leaders, Sipho Maseko, Masaneke, Dali, all of them were helping us negotiate. So there was an interesting conversation happening. But before, when that thing broke down, the option was, as you know, whether we were going to call the police and carry on, or as UCT had done, is effectively suspend and go online on the the teaching. And I had a call from a senior politician, and I named the person in the book, which said, shut down this. We think that there's an attempt to destabilize the higher education system, and we think it's happening at WITS, and shut it down. And I said, for how long? And they said 6 months. And I said, would you say this publicly? And they said, no. And I said, we want you to do it. And I said, it's not happening. And they said, but we asked you. And I said, we are not doing it. I will not shut down this place. And I went to the executive and I said, my recommendation is no. And the executive said, we will not shut down. And we stationed lawyers at the court the next morning, just in case the government tried to actually enforce to an administrative position, that we would go to court to say, no, you can't do this. Now, they never tried that second part. But what struck me is you were prepared to tell me privately, shut down for 6 months. But you were not prepared. So the problem about saying one thing publicly and doing another is not a student phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of higher education leaders, it's a phenomenon of government leaders, and frankly, to be honest, if we're going to fix the problem we have, and we haven't fixed it, we're going to have some honest conversation.
So what is the problem now? Because obviously we know Fees Must Fall was multi-layered. It wasn't just about the fees, right? We've just spoken briefly about decolonization. There was the insourcing, outsourcing of workers, and the students themselves had contestation around misogyny, identity, and all of that. But I remember on the radio during the Fees Must Fall protest, older South Africans phoning in and saying, what the hell is going on? Why don't they just go to the lecture halls and find a solution and just learn? So for a certain class and a generation of South Africans, the priority was get an education. And I do admit to that as somebody who was born in 1978 and had a township upbringing and then social mobility through education, that there was a different way in which the adults around us were talking to us. And there was a lot of fear that was communicated, that if you don't get past this stage, if exams are cancelled, your future is basically not guaranteed. And so the adults who were phoning the radio stations didn't understand why the students would gamble with their education. But at the same time, you could admire the students and say they were being radical. They were risking it all for a broader achievement. So let's talk about what radical looks like and how you would conceptualize the problems of higher education now and how they came together in the Fees Must Fall umbrella.
So this is why I think that Fees Must Fall was a legitimate struggle. So here's the thing, and I'll give you the numbers. If you were here in the early 1990s or the late 1980s, the majority of people who had wits were largely white, middle class, maybe some working class. The cost of higher education was effectively in the region of anything between 5 and 10,000 rand. If you now come to WITS in 2019 or even in 2015 or 16, the cost of fees, accommodation, and subsistence is 150,000. Now here's the irony. When you have middle class people, the cost of, in real terms, was lower than when you have more lower middle class and working class people. And the reason is that the way, and this is a global phenomenon, the university has always been a place to create the elite. It was where a small group of the elite came. It was largely subsidized by society, and you could afford it. What has happened in the last 40 years is universities have massified. It's no longer the upper elite, it's the middle classes, even the working classes. And as you see, WITS was 12, 13, 14,000 in the early 1990s. It's 37,000 today. If you went 15 years earlier, it was 7,000 students. That's now a single faculty. It's a faculty of humanities in WITS. So in a sense, that what has happened is as we started bringing in more people, we couldn't afford it, so we started cutting the subsidies. In real terms, the subsidy fell from 1996. As we were expanding black people and particularly poor people into the system. And so what the universities did, particularly the WITS, the UCTs, started increasing fees, and we priced out higher education. So there's no doubt that this is the business model of the universities is in crisis. We spoke to the vice chancellors before I came. We're speaking to government saying this is going to collapse. In fact, we knew it's coming. I had a meeting with President Zuma, the cabinet, with about 20 vice chancellors 2 weeks before, and saying we're heading for a storm. We can see 2016 is going to this thing. It didn't happen in 2016. It happened 2 weeks later at WITS. So we've got a crisis, and therefore, to be fair, the students in 2015 achieved in 10 days what vice chancellors were debating for 10 years ago. So in a sense, I think, and that wouldn't have happened without the social mobilization. Having said that, what is the problem? So here's the thing, we've got three dimensions. We've got fees, we've got accommodation and subsistence. At the moment, fees, let me say one further thing before that. Liz Langer, from the Deputy Vice Chancellor from the University of Cape Town, made this point when I was at Stellenbosch the other day. And we had this thing on the book, and she said, the challenge of the university in South Africa is it's operating in the context of a failed developmental model by the state. And so in a sense, if you, in let's say the middle of Europe, and you get ill, you go to a public hospital and it sorts itself out. If you have a mental illness, you can go to a clinic and it sorts itself out. If you have a problem with food, the state gives a subsidy. The problem in South Africa is none of those things work. So when you're in the university, what is a state failure has to now be compensated for by the state. So we run a clinic, we run a food scheme, we run a food bank, We run an agricultural farming. We compensate constantly for the failure of the state and outside society. Now that's the thing. So in practical terms, what are the problems? Fees. Fees at the moment are in the region of 50 to 60,000 rand. Here's the problem. Jacob Zuma passed a resolution at the end of 2017 that says anybody with a family income of less than 350,000, you will be covered for fees, accommodation, and subsistence by the state. At the moment, that covers 22% of WITS's students. If you go to Fort Hare, it covers 80% of Fort Hare students, but it covers only 22% of WITS students, because in a sense, the people who are in WITS, the majority are what we call the missing middle. So the problem is, has the missing middle's problem been resolved in this? It's not. That's problem number one. Problem number two is accommodation. At the moment, to find accommodation, there's a real demand. Normally, if you're in middle class, you would have family, you can stay there. When many of our students come, they come here, there's a demand for housing. At the moment, we've got 6,000 beds, 6,250 beds. The demand we calculate, is 14,000. So 6,200 beds, 14,000, to build another 8,000 would cost us anything between 3 and 4 billion. We don't have that. There is a solution in Braamfontein. South Point and other private service providers control 8,000 beds. The problem is they want to be paid. By the way, the majority owner of South Point is the PIC. That's the interesting thing. Now they want to be paid. The question is, if you reimagine, if I was the Minister of Education, I would say, you know what? There's no way the universities can afford it. We've got a massive cash housing crisis. Why not use social responsibility bonds from the PIC, guaranteed from the Treasury at a certain rate of return, and you've got the cash to build up all of the housing you want and have it managed over a period of time. So essentially, this is possible to do. So for me, is the problem, and then the third and final thing. We fixed the problem with Jacob Zuma's 2017 thing for everybody with a family income of 350,000. Last week, I had a conversation with 2 people in the state. The Treasury is asking government to say, to the Department of Higher Education, we can't afford it. There's no money. At 0.6%, there is no money in the kitty. If you were growing at 2.5%, you'll have the cash. But growing at 0.6%, there's no money. We were predicting that we'll be in a cash crunch in 2021. I suspect we're going to be in a cash crunch in 2020 unless the economy shifts dramatically. That's the problem we're in. And so in a sense, has any of this been resolved? We've done some things. I think the 350,000 is valuable. My fear is it sustainable? I'm not so sure. Have we resolved the accommodation crisis? No. Have we resolved the missing middle crisis? No. Government and DOIT know this, but they're too scared to put their head over the pulpit to say anything because it might create a crisis. The ruling party is divided. The opposition parties are hammering them. Everybody is too scared to this thing. So what are we praying? We're hoping the problem goes away. I'm telling you it's not going to go away. This is coming back in 2 years unless we mark a plan. And we have to do this quickly. And that's the thing that this book is saying. There are ways to fix this problem. Yeah, and it makes a series of suggestions. It says, in the you can fix the fee. Why not create a deal with banks? Now, I agree, the loan is not an answer. But if you bring them in, and as you get a growth rate of 3 or 4%, you dedicate a percentage every year to broaden up, say 350 to 400, if you achieve 450, and over 10 years, you shift towards at least the middle classes and the poor being covered. That's a way to do this. But none of us are looking at kind of practical solutions. To get free education, wholly free, you're going to need an extra 140 billion a year for universities alone. 140 on top of the current budget. It's unsustainable. That's the issue that we have to have. And for me, that conversation is actually missing. It's not happening in 702. It's not happening in all of the radio stations. And it's not happening sufficiently in the universities. Until we have that conversation, we dead in the water. And that for me is the big fear. And that's what this book is in part one.
All right, I'm jumping through a whole lot of themes because I want to take questions from the audience. But let's just get on to your colleagues who love you very much and wrote you a nice long love letter. And I follow you on Twitter. I've heard you being interviewed about the book. You write about this, about labels, about the tone of debate. But you do also come across as attacking the perspectives of your colleagues. You also use labels like the far left, and the tone is quite pejorative. You use the word, that one. Yeah, I had to Google it. Okay. But here's where I was reflecting quite critically about that. You use the word progressive and far left, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you use them interchangeably. Progressive and far left. No. Okay? So talk to me about far left first. What was so ugly about it?
So here's the thing, and actually the word far left actually took me a long time. We debated this, going back and forth around with my editors.
But what does far left look like? Yeah?
So what had happened at WITS, and frankly around the country, is, as you understand, fees must fall, polarized the debate in the society, and polarized the debate in the institutions. And broadly, if you want to categorize the institutions, you had people who would be conservative, as in any institution. You had people who would be broadly liberal, as in any institution. And then you would be what we would call progressive, left of center in this. And the left of center is, if you like, a broad category. I would imagine that I would see myself as part of that left of center. In that left of center, what I call the progressive, there was a division that emerged in a place like Wits University. Many of the progressives felt and understood and sympathized with the struggle, but actually did ask hard questions about whether the tactics were appropriate, whether some of the strategies were appropriate. They may have, some of them even sympathized with the dilemma of the management and how to approach it, etc. Then there was a group of people who would I describe as the far left. Now, even within this far left, there were different strands. Some would be left of liberal, some would be Maoist, some would be Trotskyists, some would be, if you like, black consciousness, some would be pan-Africanists. A fair group of them saw and made the argument that effectively the tactics and strategies have to be more, if you like, located in an insurrectionary mode. We have to take down the structures. They would argue about the legitimacy of violence, the importance of arson. And I give you quotations in this of how people said how fire is the aesthetic of revolution, rage, all of this kind of very, very evocative description. And I was saying that group, as diverse as they are, the other problem that they were not considering was the trade-offs. And my argument is, if you pursue the strategy you're doing, you'll implode the university and destroy it as an institution for generations to come. That is the argument, and that's the critique I have. Now, ironically, if you go back to my own history, I come from that tradition. I come from what is seen as the Trotskyist movement. I belong to the Workers' Organization for Socialist Action. That's the tradition, ironically, I come from. And my argument with them is that you're misreading this moment. You're seeing this incorrectly. You can be supportive of the struggle, but you don't have to actually implode the institution. The question you ask, which is a legitimate question. Adam, you worry about labor. You have this engagement in Twitter that you say to everybody, don't engage in an appropriate debate. But in the process, you land up calling people the Pol Pot Brigade. You land up calling them, far left, by the way, is used as not a pejorative term. What is a pejorative term is the Pol Pot Brigade. Because it's
I thought they were the same people.
well, yes, but they are the same people, but far left is a description of who they are. Pejorative, Pol Pot Brigade is saying, you bloody idiots. That's what it's saying. And that is a pejorative term. And that has to be acknowledged. Now, here's the thing. If I was writing an academic piece, that would be completely illegitimate. But I am writing a memoir. And what was interesting is if you go into the debates that took place at the heart of 2015 and 16 on TV, on this thing, I would have engagements with people who would say to me, you neoliberal. And I'd say, yeah, but you're behaving like a Pol Pot Brigade. You're not understanding trade-offs. So the question is, if you want to write in a memoir, you need to start writing it. You're telling your thoughts. You're telling it how you saw it. You're engaging robustly. I'll tell you this. Nobody I've referred to pejoratively in that book has been ever kind to me or hasn't said worse about me in the public domain. I can give you names, I can give you context, I can give you this thing. I, throughout that period, would engage, but I never responded to some of the public attacks. But when I'm writing the memoir, it's my right to respond to that, to critique it, to be blunt about it, because it is a memoir. It is telling my story. It is telling how I saw it. And that's the context within which, with this thing. There were rules, by the way. So for instance, who did I name? There's a big paragraph at the beginning that says, if you're a student and I think that what I would say about you might harm you, I don't mention your name. So there was a student leader who argued against exams and then came to us and said, can I write the exam in the Vice Chancellor's office? And why didn't I name the person? Well, because firstly, the person could get hurt. But secondly, you destroy the person for something that they did when they were 20 years old. I didn't. But there are other names I can't avoid. Mkhebo Dlamini put his arguments in the public domain. If I refer to Mkhebo Dlamini as the SRC president who made this argument, it would sound silly. Vuyani Pambo did so. David Dickinson did so. All of the people who engaged this, that's how I named it, and I'll say it finally. All of the people I engaged robustly say to me that they believe and demand transparency. All I'm doing is putting it out as I saw it. I'm being as transparent as you can. Now, if you ask scholars, respond. Tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me how I'm misreading it. You can't respond by saying, but you know, we're scared you're using your power as a vice chancellor. Really? Go look at Facebook and what you say about me. That doesn't look like you're scared. Come on.
Well, there's some names. I'm just more interested in the academics, your colleagues or subordinates. I don't know how it works here. Were there some names in that letter that surprised you? Because I thought it was a rather long list, almost as long as the letter itself. But they don't like this guy very much. And some of the things you are being accused of is the ethics around naming people, the protocols, and all of that. Did you violate that?
So here's the argument that they made. So firstly, I'll come to your numbers in a minute. They argued that firstly, that they can't respond. Well, firstly, they said they were false information. I can guarantee you now that there's nothing false in that. Everything I've written about, I've either carried evidence or we've got communication or all of those things. And we checked it legally. I'm not going to make a basic. So
is it possible though that some people, because I've been in this situation, that some people were speaking to you not realizing they're contributing to the content of your book, they were just chatting about whatever it is.
So,
and then you, like really clearly, you save every WhatsApp that people send you, you save every email, and then you put it in the book.
No, so here's the thing. So the first thing that is there is nothing that was said confidentially, that's the other rule. That I put, so anybody wrote to me secretly, confidentially was never put out into the public domain, and their names were not. And I can guarantee you that. So there's a series of academics where I speak about that, I leave them as anonymous. Why? Because it was sent to me in confidence. So that's the second thing. The third thing that they accuse me is, well, you use your power to really prevent us from responding. Really? Have I ever used my power?
Has anybody, we are using our power.
Well, has anybody been put in front of a disciplinary hearing for criticizing me? Has anybody ever been put in a disciplinary hearing from the academics for bringing the university to disrepute in relation to this? Come on, let's be fair. Let's have an honest conversation on this. Now, numbers. Yes, some were academics in this university, some were academics outside this university, some were postgraduate students, and I thought at last count there must have been 30 or 35. Our staff members are 1,500 or 1,600. When I took, and I speak about this in the book, when I took the decisions, those very difficult decisions in 2016, I went to every faculty. In every faculty, we carried more than 95% of the staff. In humanities, where there was the biggest critique, we carried more than 70%. When I stood for my second term in the Senate, because that the Senate decides, we had overwhelming support for my, when the survey was done. So let's be fair. This book, some people might not like my use of tactically the use of the term Pol Pot. They might say, perhaps you shouldn't have mentioned the names and done it more. I think tactically it would have made it a lesser book. But let me say this. I am convinced that the story here reflects the views of not only the majority of the staff, but the majority of the students. And when we went to the polls, that was borne out. And I think that too much of society, the university but society as a whole, has been silenced by political commissars of all kinds. And it's unacceptable.
I forgot to ask you the question about the role of politicians. I promise I'm coming to you in just 2 minutes. The role of politicians, because at some point, I'll confess, I was a talk show host at 702. I stopped talking about fees must fall because I bloody well didn't understand what the hell was going on. When it started, obviously students engaged with us. We have our reporters on the ground. We cross to them, speak to analysts, we speak to the vice chancellor, we speak to this dissenting voice, an academic, and then at some point there are politicians on TV, they are political party youth leaders, and I mean, was this always a struggle that was owned by the politicians? Did they ambush it at some point? And how well did they succeed to really co-opt the students? What happened there?
So, and the book does cover this. My view is that the movement started in 2015 as completely spontaneous. Yes, there were alignment of student political parties, but there was no doubt that in October 2015 and even in early November 2015, this was a spontaneous movement, without doubt. Politicians, I think, once the movement achieved the scale that it did, once it got the support of broader society, and in 2015, broader society was in the corner of the movement. They were very supportive of it. Politicians moved very quickly. And I dated that time as the evening when Jacob Zuma makes the first concession in 2015, and the story of Chaka Sisulu coming here and having an engagement with the ANC students and the split between ANC students and EFF students. Since then, the movement or different parts of the movement were captured by different political parties. Some by the EFF, some by the ANC. The DA was always trying to catch up. Never really got this thing. The Pan-Africanist movement and the Black Consciousness movement had quite a substantive footprint in this, and that played itself throughout 2016. What I found in 2016 is that we could not cut the deal in 2016 because political parties from the outside were saying no deal. And they were saying it for different reasons. So in 2016, this was the stunning story, when we brought Tieko Moseneke to come and assist. The big deal we struck with the Senate, I might add, and with the council, is that we will march with the students after an assembly to the Constitutional Court. That was the deal. The Senate agreed, the council agreed. That night, 4 hours or 5 hours before the assembly started, Tieko and them came to me and said, and Dali and them said, it's not happening. The student leaders have pulled out. And the question was, why did you pull it out? We've given you every single, for the Senate in Rhodes to march and the council to march with you in favor of free education to the Constitutional Court would have changed the national plan. Why would you not take the deal? And the answer was that some political parties were effectively going for a taking down of Jacob Zuma as part of a global national campaign. And they were using the university protest as a crescendo to build up to that movement. A deal 2 weeks before couldn't make sense, and it was cut. That was the decision that I said, and I remember having that conversation with the Senate. If we don't move, if we don't finish, we're not going to finish this year. There's no incentive structure for this to happen. If we want this year to complete, the only way we're going to do it is with the police. And I hated making the decision, and there's a long SMS in the book about an SMS I sent to the generals, saying about how you should behave in a democracy. And my wife said to me, you're writing that because you're not sure how this will go. So you're kind of putting it, covering yourself. And there may very well be some of that. But that, I'll tell you, 2016, we would never have finished without having made the hard decision. And frankly,
securitization, that's one of the criticisms, right? From your own colleagues.
So, and between you and me, I go through this big debate about, in 2016 October.
But sorry, and you said something that just struck me. I won't sleep if I don't ask you this. You claim that you sent the police an SMS about how to behave. This is South Africa. Okay, it's like in the US where they're shooting black men, telling them how to. You know when you're calling the police on a black man standing by himself, how that's going to end. Our police, we talk about it all the time. They're not trained. They're not. We can get into a discussion around that. Just the idea of, you seem to justify putting them on campus because you gave them a little lecture about how not to behave, but the actual act of bringing them on. And I'm asking this because it's not just a reflection on the past. It's a reflection on the future that I think is going to be, the path to the future is going to be arduous when you look at the unemployment figures that came up last week. I think that we are in for some tough times, and universities may very well be the microcosm of all this society, this angst in society. So have we set the tone for how we respond to that process?
So there's a whole, and you're right. Here's the dilemma, because the book covers this dilemma in detail. So here's the thing. You're right, I'm not denying. The police are badly trained. They're not in appropriate numbers, so they rely on weapons. and they have a propensity to shoot. That's that's the risk. The dilemma we had in October is we had 17 attempts at arson, at blowing up buildings on this campus. 17 attempts at this. The question was, would we finish the academic year? And so we had three choices. One is, I don't bring them in, but there's a risk I'm going to lose the academic year. That's the one plan. The second is I bring them in and effectively I run the risk of somebody getting killed. I run the risk of somebody getting killed. And the third was I try and contain the fallout on this. I made a calculation with the executive, by the way. We can't lose the academic year. And by the way, the vast majority of parents, students were saying to us, we have to finish this year. So, and we decided to bring it in. The police in. We decided to have an engagement. So I wrote to the generals. I went and saw the premier. I went and saw the Minister of Police. And I said, you coming in, frankly, if anybody dies on this campus, forget what's closing. The system will permanently close for years. So there has to be a mitigation. This is the challenge we confront. In the context we are in, is the answer we can't rely on the police? Or is the answer, let's develop the police so we're not forever paralyzed by the failure? You know, every year this year, I get this debate. We've got a debate happening about a security capacity. If you go to the US, every campus has a police force, which has normal, full authority of a police force. And the reason they do that is because they deal with private security, crime, etc. We have a problem with private crime. And we've covered most of the small crime. But if somebody comes with a gun here, most of our campus security don't have weapons. So the question is, if we pick up the phone and phone the police in Ilperau, they take 4 hours to come. By that time, the whole place, we've got to ask the question, either I create that capacity here, which everybody says don't do, or we better start developing a police force that is capable. But a democracy can't survive without a legitimate and well-trained police force. Because otherwise, however good your Democrats are, you'll forever be vulnerable to the violent, to the loudest, and to those that violate rights and claim their rights, but violate those of others. A democracy has to have a legitimate police force. And if there's a single lesson that Fees Must Fall puts to us, every one of us should be marching, we should be marching for free education, but our bigger demand should be, we want the police force trained, we want them developed, and we want them know how to demobilize citizen action without resorting to weaponry. That is the responsibility of a police force. And that is what we should be asking.
Okay, audience questions? Do you have a question? I think that because there's so many people and I can see so many of you are agitated to ask questions, one question per person and not started with a long intro or preamble, just a question, and then we can always come back to you if you have, if we have an opportunity.
Hi, I'm a student at WITS. I was a student in 2015-16 during Fees Must Fall. I wanted to ask, what is your opinion of Fees Must Fall leaders who are currently in Parliament? And specifically, how they used Fees Must Fall as a grandstanding political platform to leverage themselves into Parliament. Because a lot of us as young students at WITS saw these students marching from the ANC, the EFF and the DA, and were like, yo, clearly they want the attention, clearly they want to be seen as revolutionary leaders, clearly they want to position themselves as people, and they used it to angle themselves for Parliament. So what is your thought on them utilizing Fees Must Fall, not just to remove Jacob Zuma, but also to position themselves for Parliament, which they're actually in right now?
Okay, we'll take thanks. 3 questions at a time, and then Adam will answer.
I'm a student at UJ, and in 2016 I was doing my first year. And looking at how you reacted in the fees must fall thingy, other vice chancellors were actually very calm about this whole fees must fall thing. So my question is, the way you reacted, was it because you were panicking that the university was going to close, or what was the reason behind that?
Is there another question somewhere? I know what you're going to do. Just before I wrap up, all your hands are going to come.
Hi, I'm a postgraduate Wits student. I'm the chairperson of the Physics School Council, the Science Faculty Council, and the Student Forum. I was also a first year in the year Fees Must Fall started in 2015. I also have many issues with the book, but I just want to address one particular issue, and that's militarization. What started in 2015, subsequent to the protest, was this trend of militarization. And on the 20th of May this year, the SRC released a statement on militarization, saying that the university management is embarking on a project to have permanent private security presence on campus. They are calling it a proposal for crowd management and crime prevention operations. The consultations for this were held during the moratorium before the exams, and so students didn't know this was done. It was slipped in an unhanded fashion. And where is the institution finding the money for this if there's no money? And to pay the academic bonus, the executive bonuses, they should be raised as well here. So the institutional priorities are warped. Why is it that the university has money to pay the executive bonuses, to spend money on militarization, to spend money on securitization, but doesn't have money to deal effectively with the accommodation crisis, the hunger crisis, the issue of free pads that has been raised? I raised when I was chairperson of Amnesty International Wits in the bathrooms on campus, and our tutors are being paid exploitative wages. Where are institutional priorities? Why is the money being spent in this way?
Adam, you want to answer those 3, and then we'll do the next round.
So let me start with the first one, which was students. I'm not going to speak about the individuals, because I actually think some of the individuals are very interesting. Some of them have gone to parliament, by the way. There's a second which is quite interesting, and I reflect on this in the book, about a number of students who carry on talking about decolonization. Many of whom have landed up in Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and Berkeley. And it's an interesting debate about how, and I raised this with them, by the way. So I'm not raising this independently, I've raised this with the students at that Mellon conversation. Here's my problem with the parliament question. It's not about the individuals being there. My worry is that we've created an incentive structure. And the incentive structure goes like this. You come here, you create mayhem, you develop a reputation, and then you get appointed by parliament or by parties so that you can get votes, and you land up in parliament immediately earning more than R1 million salary. That incentive structure is dangerous. It's a very, very dangerous incentive structure, because you now create the incentive for people to do a whole thing. Now, if they got appointed separately, I would have no problem with it. But given the fact it's happened through this track, you've created effectively an incentive structure for political activists who see and aspire to go into become MPs, to see campus politics as the basis by which to create the platform. And I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. Now, that doesn't mean I don't think young people should be in parliament. They should be, because I think they bring an angle to questions that are slightly different. But I do think that the way it's been done, and it hasn't been done with the ANC alone, it's been done with the EFF, it's been done, you've created an incentive structure that could become very, very toxic. I worry about this. When I go around the world, and if you're sitting in the UK or the US or China, you do not see SRC elections where political parties are competing to win the SRC presidency. Last year, we had the deputy president phone and say, can we come and have a conversation? And I said, really? You're coming for an SRC election? That is really toxic. Party politics contaminates the university politics itself. It fractures it. It destroys and it fractures the environment. So that is something that I am particularly worried about. I think student politics has a legitimate right about fees, about accommodation, about all the issues. The fact that it's being motivated by party politics that is playing outside does worry me. And the question is, what does that mean? The second thing, which is a question on UJ. So there's two things that happen, which is interesting. First is, fees must fall happens where I'm occupying two roles. One is as VC of VETS. But the second is, my luck was I was the chairperson of University South Africa, which meant that all of the national negotiations, I had to represent the vice chancellors. And so in a sense, I got a profile on this by default rather than by design, because when you were sitting with the presidency, or when we were sitting with the minister on behalf of the vice chancellors, I was there in my USAP, in my University South Africa hat, rather than my VC hat. But people didn't make that distinction. That's the first. The second is, I'm not so sure that the vice chancellors were as calm as you imagine. 2016, UP had far more, in January, far more significantly closed down than Wits was. We had a much more robust thing in the end. But in January, UP, there was a difference in strategy between UCT, Wits, and UJ. UJ shut down quite quickly. You couldn't walk in the place. If you were a journalist and you went, you had to report to security, they escorted you out. There was very, very stringent controls. In Wits, we didn't. Even as late as 2016, journalists could walk into the place. Because why? We've got a much more liberal tradition. If I tried to ban journalists from coming onto campus, I would not, forget the journalists complaining, I would have the journalism unit and all, Vuvuzela and all of them actually raising the issue. So that liberal tradition was very, very different. And then, if you like, UCT, I think, was even more liberal than us. And in part, I think it's how we politically call this thing. And there's a big thing about whether Witz's strategy or UCT's strategy was more appropriate. And Max Price disagrees with me. He wrote a response saying he thought I misread it. But there's a debate around this. And it's about calculation. And about the calls you have to make.
Is it about identity politics?
It is about...
that you are a black man,
well,
and perhaps the way you can speak. You speak to Blake Nzimande and the angry black student whose history may be common, yours, background, and so on, and Max Price being Max Price.
So there was an interesting question. So here's Max. So firstly, Max Price has an interesting political pedigree. He was a progressive, he was part of the UDF, he was part of a whole, he was part of setting up the Center for Health Policy that established progressive. So he's got some serious political street cred as well. But I do think there's two parts that come into it. One is identity politics. I think that's right. I think he felt more difficult as a white male to play this out. And second, I think his personality lends him in a slightly different way. I'll reflect a conversation with Mkebo on this. Mkebo once said to me in one of our private conversations where we're having a nice, he said to me, God, I wish I had a white vice chancellor. And I said, why? And he said, well, you know, because they would be on the defensive. The really big problem with you is when I say to you, you're a neoliberal, I say, really? Me? I was in prison. I was deported by the Americans. You're accusing me? And you push back. And that's a problem. Because in a sense, it makes the struggle far more complex, far more nuanced. And in a sense, I think he touched on two things. A personality. I don't fall. I had this debate with Max Price when his farewell party was happening. And Max and I had a conversation, and Max was going to invite the Fees Must Fall guys for his farewell. And I said, Max, come on, don't do that. I said, come on, it's going to be disrupted. And Max said, no, man, you know I'm leaving, and I just want to make peace. And I want to leave with a clear heart. And I said, Max, please don't do it. And Max did it. And his farewell got disrupted. And that's Max. He's a human being. He's a beautiful human being. And so in a sense, he was prepared to he was more softer about these things. I come from a political tradition that makes hard political calculations. When I was there, ask the executive. I'd be politically calculating the movements. What are the possibilities? How are people going to move? That's the tradition I come from. It's a political tradition. It's making those trade-offs. And
you're not suggesting that in this whole debate and conversations and our transitions, there are people who, by virtue of their identity, cannot speak, are you?
I think that there are groups of people who are told they cannot speak, and some have been silenced themselves. So I've had a discussion.
Because of their views or because of identity?
Because of sometimes their views and sometimes their identity. So I've had students, white students on campus say to me that when we have a debate in the sociology class or the political science class on race, we shut up. Because if we say anything, people hit us. Or not hit us physically, but people come out against us. And I've seen people say, you shut up. You've got to come from a white history of whiteness. So here's my take.
Are they shutting them up for what they're saying? For example, if I were white and I say, apartheid wasn't so bad because it built roads. I'm just trying to understand, because there's something wrong with shutting down somebody because they're white and have a view, even if it's not they. And this whole notion that apartheid is not a lived experience for white people, I disagree with that. It traumatized the nation in different ways. Even if you benefited through it, it was your experience. So what are you saying? Is there shutting down? Because it speaks to the future of engagement at academic institutions. Are you saying at Wits University now, if there's a conversation around apartheid, you can't speak if you're white, or the black students will shut you up because of what you're saying, that we build roads for you guys, you must be happy? Because yes. I would also push back
So
against
firstly, the conversations with those white students wasn't the Helen Ziller conversation about the benefits of colonialism. It was about the strategy about whether you close or not, about whether we finish the academic program. And by the way, those views were not simply white students, black students were saying that to me as well. What was interesting is I think that they were silenced on both grounds. And there were issues. Now, then it is true, there was an interesting incident in 2016 early on, where in UCT, some students wore, I'm sorry to use the term, kill whites, and in province they had fuck whites. And it was reported to me. And there was a guy who was doing it, and I said to the guy, really, let's just ignore this, because I promise you, if I take it up, it's going to become a bigger issue, and it's this thing. So this academic staff didn't feel I was sorting it out and reported it to the Human Rights Commission. The next day, I had 15 people wearing fuck white t-shirts, 7 of whom were white, and they were wearing it. So there were many white students who were part of the movement itself. And it's the complexity of how identity happens. It's this thing. Let me say to you on this, and I'll come back to this final question that you raised. I believe there is an issue of whiteness. I do believe that people sometimes are not sufficiently appreciative of the history that comes with having been white in South Africa and the benefits that come from it, and how those benefits from a past impact on the circumstances on the present. So for me, there is a recognition of whiteness. Having said that, I don't believe that, in a sense, there is a right to say that you shouldn't talk. I believe that white citizens have a right to engage. I would like them to engage with a view to understanding a past that influences the present and making choices of social justice that say we need to make decisions that change the present because of a past. But that shouldn't say to them they must shut up. What it says to them is how do they engage? What is the debate? Engage them on that discourse. But no citizen should be said to be told, you should not talk because of the color of your skin, or the color of your eyes, or the color of your forehead, or whatever. That's just our constitution. It's a violation of our constitution. What I'd like all of our citizens to recognize is the importance of how the past is influencing the present and how social justice needs to influence it. I want to come to the final question, because I do think that this is specifics. So here's the debate. Firstly, I repeatedly have students, including the SRC, who've said to me, we need a form of security on campus that prevents violent crime. That we've had violent crime on this campus, sometimes by students, most times by people from the external that can get in. We can close access for the external, by the way, but we can't, because by the very nature of what this institution is, and 45,000 people walking through its doors, it's impossible to do that. So in a sense, we have to have some security. The issue of the police, I've said, even in cases where there has been violence, it takes them 3, 4, 5 hours to come into the thing. And students and women students in particular who are vulnerable pay the price. I have currently in West Campus, I'm having an argument with our security about why don't we have enough police, and not police but security staff there. Why is the lighting not up? Because we've had people being assaulted and their wallets stolen, etc. So we've got to protect this campus. And frankly, ideally if I lived in Toronto, I'd say I don't care about this thing, the police will be here within 3 minutes, and voila. But I don't live in Toronto. I live in Johannesburg, and frankly, I got choices. Now, my campus security is great, but they don't have weapons. They're really not trained in the appropriate format. So what do we want to do? We want to bring, yes, a group of 40 people who are trained in no weapons. By the way, no weapons, but they will be trained to apprehend violent crime and those who engage in violence. They will be trained in gender sensitivity courses. They will be trained in transformation issues. We've got that as part of it. And frankly, that's the motivation we've made. It's gone through a consultation exercise. You're absolutely right. It was happening at the end of May. The SRC said, we're unhappy. So we had a round of consultations at the end of July and early August. And those conversations have been going on. So when you say we're being deliberately passing it through, that's not true. It's going through this thing and those consultations are happening. Do I think they should be here? Absolutely. Now, you ask both the issue of executive bonuses and you ask the issue of the costs of this. These people will be insourced. By the way, there's another reason why. You can't trust private security. Because I don't know who they send. And a couple of times when we brought private security and students told them, the private security started throwing stones as well. Now we can't,
This place is crazy.
we need people who are appropriately trained. So that was the first, that's why we're thinking about bringing them in source, training them, gender sensitivity, etc. The second, I don't know what this is costing. It's going to cost because you're looking at 40 staff members. But I'll tell you what, in 2016, our cost, what our private security cost. Private security cost us 40 million. I called in the SRC, by the way, in 2016. And I said, I promise you private security doesn't come. I put that entire 40 million into the student scholarship fund. Let's cut a deal now. They refused. This past year, the same year, I said to the SRC, I'll take the entire monies we put in for security and put it into the student scholarship fund. Give me a commitment that if anybody is violent on this campus, we agree that they shall be, jointly we agree, that they shall be immediately suspended and expelled. They said we can't do it. Now, come guys, you can't play, that's when you claim the rights of a democracy, but refuse to take the responsibility of it. Let me give you another one, executive bonuses. So you want to talk about executive bonuses. Here's the thing about executive bonuses. We've got executive, there's a pattern of salaries that happen. If you add the WITS executive, their salary plus their bonus, they're number 7 or 8 in the country. This is a university that pays the highest amount of scholarship. It pays its academics the highest in the country. It pays its administrative staff the highest in the country as an aggregate level. Its executives get paid at 8th or 7th in the country. By the way, you can just think that I can prove that with numbers. So that's the thing. But that's the thing. And it was benchmark analysis that was provided. So now, even with that, what I do, and I shouldn't be speaking about this, but since we are debating it, what I do it in the book. 50% of mine goes, I don't take it, it goes to a scholarship for students. Somebody told me the other day, which I don't think, why are you writing about a book about fees must fall? What gives you that right? And what are you doing with the money?
Proceed.
By the way, I said to them 2 things. Firstly, I wrote the book, I make the decision what happens with the royalties. Having said that, I've written to Ford Foundation, which is a sister's house, and said, I will give up the royalties if you give it up, so then we give it to the scholarship fund. In 2012, I wrote a book, Suspended Revolution. The scholarship, this royalties went to the scholarship fund. So come, Chief. You want to talk? Let's talk facts. Let's sit down and get to the mechanics of this debate.
Okay, I want to get back to the book now. I don't want to talk about the royalties.
Jesus, you tell the boy.
Okay, we'll take 3 questions and then...
Okay, my name is Kale Natanya. I'm an academic staff member at VET.
I can't see you, sorry. Sorry.
So, I was on the ground during the Fees Must Fall, and I think my perspective is very different from yours. So part of what I was doing during the time, I was containing students who were shot by rubber bullets and tear gas. We would cluster in most cases at the campus health. And for me, as a black child who grew up in apartheid South Africa, lived through 2 states of emergencies during the Everton uprising, I had to relive the trauma. But my disappointment, Vice Chancellor, was how in militarizing campus, how black bodies were violated in this space, how I would walk into a building, I'm about to go into a lecture, and I'll be stopped because I'm a black body, you know, and my white colleagues will be allowed to go through. And therefore, we remain a very divided society or community as VET academic staff members. But also, how you were so silent when we reported the sexual violence, how young female students were violated by private security and including police officers on campus. And we reported that through different platforms and there was nothing. So for me, if I were to take the analogy and an African one to look at you as the father of this household, you basically opened the door wide, you allowed people to come in, and you walked away. Thank you.
Second and third questions, and then...
My name is Noah. I am a Wits alumni from the Department of Philosophy and that of Political Science. And I was also in the great witness of FISMA's fall. So I would like to remind you what you did some months before FISMA's fall, which is contradicting your view on decolonizing the curriculum. Several Lamini raised a point on Hitler, some positive elements of Hitler's leadership which contributed to the development of Germany. But we were surprised, and myself as a philosopher, I was a little bit astounded by the swiftness with which you forced him to step aside without engaging him epistemologically and even bring that issue to all of us through conferences, for example. You forced him to step aside. So I found that very, very dangerous, because it was a sort of showing that the Senate is in the thralls of a dominant political and ideological agenda. So whosoever in this place can raise a viewpoint which is contradictory to that agenda should face the consequences. So you inhibited innovation in social sciences. But I know, because I come from political science, we've got a course called the Exceptional State, where we study also Nazi Germany. Some of us even got higher marks by raising positive aspects of Hitler. So now we did it before FISMA's fall. Now with
Okay, I'm going to speed you up, sir. I'm sorry. In the interest of time, because we want to go around again, do you think you could just wrap up the...
Yes. I'm doing it.
That you want to make?
Yeah. My point here is, with the post-FISMA's fall hindsight, do you think it was wrong and we should repent? Okay. And secondly, do you think that this has created a positive atmosphere for innovation in this place?
All right, we've got the...
Thank you.
Last one. Okay. Thank you. Can we have some... Oh, we had some gender representation.
I'm Nicolette, and I'm a VIT alumni. So my question is to do with organizational structure and decision making. For lack of a better word, I wanted to know who owns the university. Is it private owned? Is it privately funded? Is it government funded? And if so, who influences the decision making? For example, with the fees must fall. Were you at disposal of making your own decisions with regards to your knowledge for the university, or was it influenced by the private ownership or by the government ownership?
In today's parlance, you're handlers.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
So let me start off with the question here. I think that there were three questions that I want to respond to that. The first is you raised the issue that your perspective was very different from mine, and I entirely agree. I don't think I saw this from a particular angle. 11th floor. Very distinct, but I did see it from a particular angle. I also say that very clearly in the book itself. The 11th floor gives you some insights. It doesn't give you all insights. So I understood the challenges of our finances in a way that probably very few people understand. The issues of engagement with government. The issues of the challenges that played out around a macro picture. I understood what science was saying, and engineering and the health sciences, as much as what others were saying. We have a different picture, and I agree that it's not the same. Yes, at one level, there is no doubt that fees must fall, and the police action in that period traumatized our students and some of our staff. And I think I'd be lying if I didn't acknowledge that. And I would be lying to say that every single person that got shot was somebody committing a violence, because that you cannot say. And I can tell you that it is something that I can understand, that people say that it relived experiences in a manner that people would not have. At one level, let me give you the other perspective. As somebody who was in prison, who was in solitary, who was interrogated in solitary, I went through quite a crisis about having to make this particular decision. The question you have to ask is the dilemma we were confronted with. Do I let this institution close and lose graduates of 8,000 who would not qualify? Do I bring in the police and close and finish the academic year? And if you recall, I went to a vote on this. And I know some people don't like the vote, but it's from the evidence that you have, nobody has proved a better set of evidential data on what the vast majority of students wanted. And 78% of 30,000, of 16,000 students, but it went down to 30,000, 78% said, we want to finish this academic year. So that's the context that you have to put yourself in. I accept you didn't have to make that decision. By burden of choice, I was in a position to have to make that decision. You make the choices and you play the cards you dealt with. You don't duck the hard decisions that have to be made. The issue of sexual harassment, by the way, it's not true that we didn't deal with it. And the book deals with it extensively. So if you go to the gender office, you will see they raised it with me on multiple times. And what they asked for, and I said, what would you require? They said, we want everybody named. We put names on private security. Then we argued that they wanted gender sensitivity training. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, the director of the gender office used to go to them and say, here's how you behave, here are the protocols, etc. We did remove individuals who were involved. So actually it's not true. Did it stop this thing? No, it didn't. Because actually, when you put 300 private security from the outside, who hang around and you can give them as much gender sensitivity training you want. If there's you can't monitor it in its entirety. But we did make mechanisms. The third thing you raised, which is an interesting issue, I raise it, I know I'm going to get clapped for it, but forgive me. It's an important issue. You raised the issue of the father. And I've truly grappled with this debate about the analogy of the role of the Vice-Chancellor. And is the Vice-Chancellor the father, or is the Vice-Chancellor a strategic senior executive whose responsibility is to show empathy, but not to play the role of the father or the mother? I must say I'm in the first. I think I'm an executive who should show empathy, who should understand context. But I do not believe that a Vice-Chancellor plays the role of a father. I think it's a very, very dangerous set of circumstances and implications. And I worry about that. And there's a really interesting debate to be had, because I know there's a debate emerging in universities. Should we be the father or the mother? Or are we an executive who shows empathy? And I think that I'm in the executive who shows empathy. I think I am not here to become the father of 37,000 people. It's impossible, and it actually distracts from the strategic role that I have to play.
So you don't want to be Ubaba, basically.
Well, that's the point. I think it's not good for the university. Now, you might disagree with me, and by the way, there are vice chancellors who disagree with me, and we had this debate about what is this thing. But I'm of the view that your role this is an 8 billion institution. You've got to make some really strategic choices. You need to be an executive with empathy, but you do not play the role of Ubaba.
But isn't the point, though, that in the context of people with weapons on campus...
So that's what I mean by empathy.
So, yeah.
I agree with the empathy part. But there's a debate elsewhere, and I've had this debate with others. So yes to the empathy. No to taking over that role. And that debate is an issue. The empathy is yes, and I understand that's how you may have presented it. But I'm raising a more broader strategic question that is open. The Nkebo question is an interesting one. By the way, I released a public statement on this, and a letter to every student member. And it said the following. I disagree with Nkebo's views on Hitler. I found them abhorrent. But there is no way that I can force him to stand down on that basis. Because actually, he is protected by his freedom of expression and views to be able to say that in this place. I also clarified why he was being asked to step down. He was asked to step down because we have a constitutional rule in the SRC that says if you have been found guilty of violation and found guilty by the disciplinary hearing, you're not allowed to be a member of the SRC. When he stood, he had been charged for having assaulted somebody. And the big debate was, can you allow him to stand? And we said, you can't stop him to stand because he hasn't been found guilty yet. But in February, that committee found him guilty. And the question became, he was violating the Constitution itself. And in that context, we gave him 3 weeks to appeal. The appeal wasn't happening, and I said to him, you've got to stand down. And he said, I refuse to. And I said, if you don't stand down, I will be forced to force you to stand down. And I gave the SRC the right, and the SRC ducked the question. And so I enforced the constitution of the SRC as is my responsibility. Now, I wrote a letter to every student and staff member explaining every one of those things. And I said, by the way, I don't agree with him. I think his views are abhorrent. But there's no way I can act with him on that. I am acting in this regard. And that was made clear. Then I had subsequent debates in a debating forum with the Student and Representative Council on that issue, downstairs. And we had that same debate and I explained this. So it had nothing to do with this thing. And I can debate you on Hitler and this thing as much as I disagree with the, what's her name? The previous premier recently. Helen's, see, I'm even forgetting Helen. As much as I disagree with her colonialism tweet, I disagree with the views that have been put forward by that. This is, but we can debate that at the second time. The final thing is a really interesting question. The South African University is a public university. WITS is a public university. And it is effectively, it's not a state institution, by the way. It's a public institution. So it's created by an act of parliament. It receives a subsidy from the state, but its governance board is chosen from a variety of stakeholders. And its governance board is made up of 30 people, I think too big, but okay. it has 4 representatives from government, then it has a provincial representative, then it has alumni, then it has people from donors, and basically it makes a whole series of people. So it's a public entity, but not a state entity. You asked the second question, how is it funded? In 2015, 48%, 47%, actually to be fair, about 40% of its, 43% of its funding came from the subsidy. 52 or 53% of its funding came from fees. Now remember, some of the fees are paid by scholarships that come out from the state itself. But the subsidy constituted 43%. And that had been declining consistently, and university. So ironically, it was a public university, but the majority of its income came in the form of private fees, whether through scholarships or other things. So it's a public university, but it's financed in a majority of the districts privately. The final thing that's worth bearing in mind in that, since 2016, that subsidy has gone up. So last year, we had a subsidy increase of 11 to 12%, which allowed us to bring fees down to 5.3%, because the subsidy was so much higher, and because it was 50% of the district, it made up by 11 or 12, 3 or 4%, we could pull down the fees in that. My fear is if that happens again, that's cool, but my fear is the ability of the state to do that sustainably is going to unravel in 12 or 18 months, unless the growth rate hits 3%. Now, I'd love the growth rate, the South African growth rate. Now, who here thinks it's going to hit 3%?
That's why I thought you were speaking about someone else. Maybe there's a tree somewhere.
So I worry that the sustainability is under threat.
Okay, should I take 2 more questions and then we wrap up the evening? Ooh, I knew you'd do this. Now all your hands are coming up. Okay, 3 more and then we wrap it. It's already past. We're 11 minutes behind.
It's Dr. Precious Leila from the School of Civil Engineering. I find it very hard to believe one of the statements made by the VC, and that has got to do with the canvassing of feelings of staff. I do remember that there was a poll that we had to take as staff, but my understanding of the poll was that it was one universal poll for all staff. But the VC spoke about having gone to different faculties, and with, I think you said upward of 90% of staff being in favor of the university open. I don't remember our views as academics in engineering being canvassed in isolation from the rest of academics at the university.
Okay, I'll give you the dates.
Okay, my name is Fighter Mzwandile Mashangu. Evening. Okay, my question is very simple. From your point of view, or as far as you're concerned, do you see Fismas Fall coming back in South Africa in the near future? If yes, I'd like to know why. If you say no, I'd like to know why.
Okay, we've had 2 questions here. We need to have one from this side, I'm afraid. Equitable share of the microphone.
Good evening, Prof, and thank you for taking my question. If I understand you correctly, the decolonization and free project at institutions of higher learning is theoretically just.
It's theoretically just.
Yeah. But we don't know how to make it practically good. How do we get to that stage? And secondly, throughout the discussion, rather, you've used the word trade-off repeatedly. Trade-offs repeatedly. Now, somebody from the left can argue that, well, higher education is a social good. And somebody else might argue that to make that a economically sustainable model, it has to be a function of the price paid. And issues of affordability come into question. Like in the South African context, being able to afford manifests on racial and gender lines. So what are the trade-offs that business, government, and institutions of higher learning need? What trade-offs need to be made? Thank you.
So those are the 3 questions. Huh?
So let me start with Precious. So Precious, what I said is 2 things. One is the opening of campus and continuing was done by Paul. I also said I went to the faculties to discuss, to explain the strategies we adopted, and we did this twice. We did this in January 2016 after, you remember, we brought in the private security for the first time to do the registration process. And then I went there in October again, and I did address every faculty. And every faculty, except humanities, where I said we had about 70%, 72% of the support. In every other faculty, we carried over 90%. Now, if you want the precise date, I'm happy to give that to you. I don't have them with me here, but I can guarantee you that I was in the faculty of engineering. I can guarantee you I had an engagement twice, one in January and the second in October, around the broader issues. And the precise date, because we tracked them, we've got them at something, and I can give you those dates. I can even tell you, because I made very, very close records of all of these things. That's how I wrote the book. I got 5 books of these things as the process. I can tell you which date, what happened, who said what, and if you want to have that, I'm happy to show that to you. So if you give me a shout, I'm happy to take it up. The second is the fees must fall when it come back. My fear is this. Fees must fall was a revolt, not of the working class, but of the middle class. What we've come to call the missing middle. And actually the solution that was put, however morally correct, has not fixed the problem of the middle class. They still confront the fees. They still don't have a mechanism to fund it. They still don't, it hasn't resolved itself. So the very agent that actually led the revolt of fees must fall has not had the satisfaction of a solution that's addressed their challenge. And that is what frightens me and keeps me awake about this. Can it be resolved? Yes. But is it being resolved at this moment? No. And I think it could aggravate by the fact that government growth rates are so low that even the limited things that they have done is not sustainable. So, here's the point. If there's a sore and it continues to fester, there's always an explosion. And in this context, we haven't resolved the challenge. So the potential of it coming back is very, very real. And the problem is, what do we do about this? Now, that takes, and so in a sense, I think it's possible, and I think it's a huge risk. The only time it actually doesn't, it recedes is if growth rates kick off, and I'm not seeing growth rates kick off in a big way. This year, I suspect this year, next year, we'll probably have fees increase, by the way, of 5.3% in that region, for inflation. For the next 3 years, we've given salary increases of 7%. I've had an engagement with the unions. I said to them that the Treasury is saying to us now that we want to make clear to you that you are paying salaries above inflation, and that's no longer tenable, and we're going to bring down the subsidy so that you're forced to bring it under inflation. What's the potential possibility? Massive strikes. So there's a real challenge that is emerging in this context, which brings me to your answer. Do I think about trade-offs? I think that there's a challenge. I've said this before, and I said this last week at the union. I addressed the union, NAPTOSA, in KwaZulu-Natal. And I said this to them. we're not as a country going to get out of this mess unless unions are prepared to start making more reasonable wage demands. That's never going to happen until the rich in the society start making their own concessions. So I would argue that we should legislate. And I think you can do this. It's been done in other countries. No CEO in the top 200 companies should get a salary increase for 4 years or 5 years. No cabinet minister should get a salary
now you want
for
to
5
start a war.
No vice chancellor should get a salary increase for 5 years. Then you start a conversation with the unions to say, now we've done that, we want you to be within inflation for the next 5 years, and we then make a commitment to invest in higher education, in public health, in the kinds of issues that enable us to turn around.
Adam, come on. I mean, the playing field is not level. Symbolically, you've done it, but if I'm on a bonus of multi-millions and I'm not earning for 5 years, and I'm starting on such a low base as a miner or a domestic worker or whatever, it doesn't affect us in the same way.
That's exactly right. But that's why I'm saying to the business CEOs, what the hell do you have to lose? The symbolism is important. That's why I'm not saying that the workers don't take anything. I'm saying they take inflation. The others don't take nothing. And that's the thing. Because you're richer, actually, to be honest, it won't change anybody's life. It's the fact that you're not prepared to do it is just bloody greed. If you did it, it won't change your lifestyle. It won't change. Actually, you'll win some kudos. If you win some kudos, you create the circumstances to win academic. But trade-offs can't happen from the poor. You have to start at the rich, then you roll out at the poor. So I think trade-offs like that are there. I think there's a trade-off on the subsidy versus this thing. Here's the problem. Very simply. If we, in the last 5 years, we've increased academic costs. So investments in the academies by 14% per annum for 5 years. Why? Because we were able to get more income. Here's the thing. If the subsidy falls and the fees don't go up to an equivalent amount, it means I cut. I cut positions, or I cut structures, or I cut costs. So there's a choice. There's a trade-off to be made in this. I wish I didn't have to run and make sure that it runs even. But there is a trade-off that plays. At the moment, it costs 380 million a month to keep this running. 380 million. Our reserves is 500 million. If government stops funding us and fees stop funding us, we got 1.5 months. By the way, we're okay. Some of the other universities have like a couple of days. The ones who are better off than us, about Stellenbosch and UP, they could last 9 months. About what it is. That is the predicament that we are confronted with. You raise the final issue, which is the decolonization issue. You see, the decolonization for me is this. I think it's real and it has to happen. I think how it happens at the level of specific reforms is going to differ from discipline to discipline. And how it plays out in software engineering is different to how it's going to play out in political science. It's going to be very different to play out in mining engineering or the health sciences, etc. I do not have the expertise in all of these disciplines to make those choices, and no executive does. What we establish is the process. The process in 2018 we put forward is that every school has to have a deliberation with its staff, its students, its alumni, and the professional bodies to re-deliberate. You don't have to change, but if you have to ask the question, what should change in this debate? And I think that there are two parts to this debate. Some are technical reforms. I'll give you an example. We used to have a policy in engineering where if you don't do the subject and if you fail it in the first semester, you have to wait for the second. There's no offer in the second semester. You have to wait 1 year to come back. That's silly. Your technical reforms, you offer it again in the second semester. But then there's other reforms which are pedagogical. It's how do you learn? Should you be doing it through lectures or group work? What are the projects that you set up? Should it be based in context? When you're setting an examination question in physics, should you be talking about if you're in the train moving from Oxford to Cambridge, or should you be saying when you're in a train trying to go from Mdantsane to East London? So that people can identify in real senses about content. That's the specific debate. And it seems to me that what we can establish is process, not what should happen. And then it's at the level of the discipline, where the precise modalities of the pedagogy and the impacts on the discipline needs to happen. So I'm going to stop there. I do want to say thank you to all of you. I do want to say,
can I say something? Just one? I won't be long.
No, you said after to him.
I love how you guys made sure that the workers who had been taken out were brought back. What is it called?
Sources.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. That's we love compliments. Okay, are you done?
So the only thing I was going to say, the thing that I loved about this event most of all is the fact that we can have a debate in the free space of ideas is enshrined in this institution. And that is precisely what this project is.
Do you love your job? I have to ask you.
Francis Peterson from UFS once said, got angry with me when I said in the middle of 2016, it's the shittiest job around. But it's a job that if I was asked again, I'd do for the simple reason that I'm entrusted a responsibility, a difficult responsibility, but an important responsibility, and that's an honor.
On that note, thank you everyone for having come out tonight to have this conversation with us. I said earlier this is a conversation about Wits, but given Wits's stature, given the role that we play in society, it's inevitably a conversation about so much more. The challenges we face as a nation, the challenges we face as the world. And so thank you so much really for having come, for having set the scene, for having managed this, and for also asking Prof some of those tough questions and not just accepting what he's saying. That's how we know you, that's how we love you, and so thank you very much for that. A small token of appreciation. Thank you to everyone that have come, who made it possible for us to be here tonight. There was someone who was shouting, can I have my book signed and so on. I'm sure Prof is available afterwards to engage you further. Thank you.
You can.